So thanks again for being here. Southern Dharma welcomes all of you. Some of you who are joining us for today's program may not be familiar with Southern Dharma, so I'll just say a few words about the organization, which has been around since 1979. And we operate a retreat center. We also do programs in other places at times, but many of you have probably been to the retreat center, which is located about an hour outside of Asheville, North Carolina, on ancestral Cherokee land. And we offer a diverse schedule of retreats that all have a strong Buddhist grounding. And sometimes, or I would say almost all the time, incorporate insights from other wisdom traditions as well. Our teachers really bring together a lot of different practices and teachings, all within the Buddhist framework, and all with a thread of noble silence. So if you haven't been with us before, we'd love to see you sometime at the retreat center. Just a quick announcement about in 1 week, next Sunday, we'll be having our first annual community picnic day at the retreat center. And if you're in the area or within driving distance, we'd love to see you. There are a few spots left for that, and there are only about 3 spots, I think, left for the day-long program next Saturday. You can read more about that on our website. And that one's taking place in West Asheville. And then just a little bit about this particular series and kind of how it came about and how we chose to offer it. You know, there were a number of people in our community, including teachers, who are writing to me mostly to ask about kind of what Southern Dharma's response could or would be to the events unfolding in Israel and Gaza. And you know, there are a number of different ways, of course, as an organization that we can approach this. I think what we felt in the end was most skillful would be to really showcase our some of our teachers talking about what it's been like to navigate this time from their perspective, both in terms of their own personal histories, but also as Buddhist teachers. So we have had a 3-part series. This is part number 2. For those of you who wanted to join us last time but weren't able to, we hope to perhaps offer other sessions like that in the future where we can just share with each other in sangha. But on this particular occasion, today's session, we're going to be hearing more from our teachers, Ronya Banks and Donald Rothberg, who have both been teaching with Southern Dharma for a while. And we're going to have some time once they kind of wrap up their opening kind of conversation to offer some reflections or perhaps to ask questions. What we'll do is you're welcome to raise your hand at that time and ask a question on camera if you'd like to. If you'd prefer to just put your question in the chat, you can either put it in the chat to everyone and we'll be able to see that question, or you can send it directly to me as the Zoom host, and then I can share your question back with the teachers, which wouldn't require that you come on camera or speak. So it's up to you. Thanks again so much to both Donald and Ronya for embarking on this journey with us together. I think it's very brave what we're doing, and I think it's also really different from a lot of other sessions that we're seeing offered. So it's just a real pleasure to be able to continue to innovate new ways for us to kind of learn and grow together as a community, and particularly in the world outside of the retreat center, which is where all of us live. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to our teachers. And thanks again for joining us today. If you have any technical issues of any kind, of course, please feel free to write me a message in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sonia, and thank you for making this available, not only to us, but all of us who are practitioners in the Dhamma. Today's session, we're going to be exploring our heritage, our roots, our conditioning, different things that brought us to this place today, and how we're responding to the conflict overseas. And before we get started, Donald and I both felt like it's really important for all of us to just settle in and take a few moments to arrive. So right now, if you feel okay to do that, taking a few deep breaths and settling into your body and into this precious moment, however it seems to you. And just taking these next few moments to arrive and to connect.
Thank you very much, Ronya. And again, my name is Donald Rothberg, and I'm pleased to be with everyone. Thanks so much to Sonia for your initiative, really, to bring this series into being. I don't know another retreat center that's doing something like this. And so it's really appreciated. And uh, again, in a few moments, Ronya and I will be in dialogue for a period of time and explore and uh, talk a little bit about our backgrounds and histories, but mostly just explore in a live manner. And I don't know, I personally feel like partly I'm going into the unknown right now. You know, this is a powerful and charged area. And I remember I have a friend named Stephen Folder, some of you may know, who was the founder of the Insight Meditation organization in Israel and has spent a lot of time doing collaborative work in the West Bank. And he said that the current time is really a test of our Dharma, of our practice. And I believe that. And connected with that, I wanted, before Rania starts, I wanted to just mention a few guidelines for our time together that will, I think they're relevant for Ronnie and I talking together, but also very much for our time when we'll have towards the last third of our session, we'll have chance to all of us talk together to be in large group discussion. And so a few suggestions and guidelines, which are really ways of bringing our practice into our time together. The first is following Sonia, the invitation, especially for those who may have just come in, as much as possible to keep the videos on. You can have that sense of connection and community. We want generally to be following the Buddhist guidelines of non-harming, of care, wise speech, and so forth. And one of the particular ways that that manifests is really to have the intention of empathy, of listening and speaking with the intention to understand and connect. Empathy is a way to tune in to what's there for someone, what's important for someone, one of the speakers or another person in our group. And a very key point is that one can have significant disagreement and still practice empathy. Empathy can totally coexist with disagreement. So that's a really crucial point. And if that was followed by the world, it would be a very different place. I'll just say that. And then lastly, as much as possible, one of the ways we can practice skillful speech is to bring a kind of mindfulness to our experience while also listening. We sometimes talk about this as an inner and outer mindfulness, to listen to your own inner responses or reactions, the emotions that are there, but also to listen outwardly. So we'll come back to those because we'll remember those, some of those also as we go into large groups. So I'll turn it back to Ronya now. And just to say that what we imagined was a dialogue. We'll each talk initially for something like 6 or 7 minutes, talking a lot about our background, history. Some we'll have a few images, and then we'll, after both of us have done that, we'll really go into open exploration together, which is not scripted. Ronya, please.
Thank you so much. So yes, I'm going to go through and just for a few minutes talk about my Palestinian heritage and Palestinian background. First of all, I was born in Kuwait to Palestinian American parents. My father was born in Palestine, 1933. My mother was born in America. She converted to Islam and learned Arabic, and when she married my father and became, in all intents and purposes, a good Palestinian wife. My grandparents that were in Palestine were illiterate farmers, and they started out very poor. They never learned how to read and write, and they worked very hard. They had 9 boys. My father was number 5, and they amassed basically hundreds of acres of land as farmers. Over time, they kept buying new land, worked very hard on the farms. They had olive groves and figs and sesames and watermelon and corn, onion, garlic, tomatoes, okra, plus sheep and goats, herders that they sold those as well as chickens. So they worked very hard on the farm, and they were considered pretty wealthy farmers. They worked very hard. And then in 1946, I believe it was, the English military came through and took away half of their farmland. And so then they struggled to make ends meet with only half of their land. And then 1948, they came through and took the rest of their land away, except for a small mountain that was left, that was a rock mountain. and their house where the 11 of them lived. They closed all the Palestinian schools, so my father couldn't go to school. And you have to understand, my grandfather and grandmother worked so hard, and they didn't want to see their boys have to work so hard. So they really drilled in them education, education, education. You need to get a good education. So they sent my father and one of his brothers to Egypt, and they continued school because they couldn't continue school there in Palestine. They were lucky enough to be able to go over there. The family nearly starved to death at that time because everything was taken away. They only had a barrel of dates to live off of. My father and his brother worked in Egypt, selling whatever they could in order to eat while they went to school and to pay for their apartment. My grandfather and his brother were thrown in jail originally in 1948 for no reason. They were accused of, complaining, which they didn't do. And several of my father's family members were shot and killed during this takeover. So needless to say, my father had a lot of trauma. He and his brother came to the United States. My grandparents, they took a loan out on that little piece of land they had, and sent them to America to college. And my father wanted to become a doctor, MD, medical doctor, but they didn't allow Arabs to become doctors at the time. So he became an engineer. He studied. And then he and my mother went back to Kuwait, where the rest of us were born. And when I was 5 years old, my family decided to come back to America because the education system there wasn't as good as America. They wanted us to have a good education. And I was very traumatized when I came back because I was raised as Islamic Palestinian in an Arab country, and I didn't speak good English. And when we came to the United States, we were met with a lot of hatred. The other kids threw stones at us and called us names, savages, infidels, the N-word. We were called those sorts of things. It didn't take me long to learn that I had to hide my heritage. My siblings and I we all decided to, we can't let anybody know who we are and what we are. So we started dressing like everyone else, fitting in. So basically I started living a double life. At home, we ate Arab food, and we, went to the temple, the mosque, we prayed, but I quit speaking Arabic. We all quit speaking Arabic because we didn't want anyone to know our heritage. We were really ashamed of it. And it became this really, this silent thing. Just don't let anybody know who you are. Called carpetbaggers, terrorists, Arab, sand, the N-word, you name it. And meanwhile, my dad was very traumatized, so he pretty much inflicted a lot of his trauma onto us. He had very, very high anxiety. He had high fear level. He was kind of paranoid. He had explosive temper that we never knew when was going to come out. And he was very controlling, which vacillated between that and being very sweet and loving and generous and passionate and kind and playful. So he went back and forth depending on whether he was having a trauma response or not. And his best friend was a Jewish man. And he kept telling us to love everyone, even if they're a Jew. So there was some anti-Semitism that kind of came out through that. But he also kept telling us we have to love everybody. I heard an onslaught of stories about throughout my entire life of all the terrible things that are happening to family, hardships on the West Bank. My grandparents ended up leaving because they couldn't take the abuse anymore. They weren't allowed to make a living. There's long stories of all of that. But it was really intense, but this is the background I come from. And I learned to hide my heritage and to hope that no one ever found out, to be ashamed of it. Sonia, do you mind just sharing those pictures and then I'll be done? So this was my Palestinian grandmother. Both my grandparents had red hair and very light skin. Next, please. This is my Palestinian grandfather, Sido Ahmed. Next. These are not their olive groves. I don't have a picture of theirs, but these are olive groves in Palestine or Israel. And they had, several hundred trees. Next. And this is my dad in the center. Very dynamic personality, and his two brothers. All of his brothers were highly educated. The one on the left is an engineer, along with my dad, and the one on the right had a PhD in literature and was a college professor. We had an MD in the family, and the rest were all engineers. Anyhow, that's my background. Thank you. Donald.
Yeah. Thank you, Ronya. There's a lot there. We've talked a lot, but I learned things I didn't know just now. So I'll also briefly share some of my background, then we'll go into dialogue, and there'll be some similar themes. Particularly we'll come to we'll talk about practicing with trauma quite a bit. So my own ancestry is Jewish and from Eastern Europe, and all of my grandparents were immigrants who came from basically conditions of oppression and came to the US, came to New York. On my father's side, they came from a place which is now part of Moldova, not too far from Ukraine, a small town called Soroki. And maybe let's use those images. I'll show the images as I speak. So this is an image of Soroki in what's now, it used to be called Bessarabia. It was a small town, and let's go to the next one. This is my father's family, not too long after they came. They came to the US in 1913, basically fleeing. At that time, the area was part of Russia. And Russia had a regulation that all Jewish men between 18 and 35 had to serve 25 years in the Russian army. Believe it or not, it's hard to believe. And so I think my grandfather, the one on the right, when he was probably 5 or 8 years younger than this, decided to leave and came to New York. On my mother's side, we can go to the next one. They came from Lithuania. This is a town near where my grandmother, Ray, lived. This is what used to be called Vilna, now called Vilnius. This is around the late 19th century. On my mother's side, they both came in 1903, leaving right after there was a pogrom in the area of Vilna. My grandmother lived with her family in a rural area about 15 or 20 miles out of Vilna. And my grandfather lived in Kovno. Next photo. These are my great-grandparents, a little bit after 1903, once they had come to New York City. So can let go of the slides. And so that's part of the background. I think we'll also talk about, for me, there also was quite a bit of resonance with what Ronya was mentioning, that interestingly, my father also wanted to be a doctor and was not permitted to go to medical school because at that time they had quotas for people of Jewish background, which not so well known in terms of history, but those quotas existed at many schools, universities through till the 1960s. So I was aware of that, and there were many ways, again, we can come back to it, that I received a certain amount of anti-Semitism, and often I found people mispronouncing my name all the time, misspelling it, and at different times I wanted to hide my identity. I think probably not quite as intense as what you experienced, Ronya, but it was also there. And one just further piece of my own background, and an important part of my background that I bring to this discussion, is that I was invited to teach retreats in Israel in 2017 and 2019. I was invited by the Insight Meditation organization in Israel called Tovanah that I mentioned. Stephen Folder was the founder of that. And I gave a number of retreats, mostly co-taught with Israeli teachers. A lot of the teachers were members of what they called engaged Dharma, and they were trying their best to be active on Israel-Palestine issues. I went with a number of them 3 times into the West Bank and East Jerusalem, met a number of Palestinians, had some wonderful times going to Ramadan meals with extended families, meeting people, connecting, but got a very upfront taste of the situation. And it was pretty shocking. My first sense being there was that this is like Mississippi in 1920. And my second thought was, I think it's quite a bit worse. That was some of my original sense. And I have felt since then really a commitment to help in whatever ways I can with really addressing the situation. So I've done it in small ways, been part of some groups that have been helping, for example, to develop mindfulness centers in the West Bank, led by a Palestinian student of Thich Nhat Hanh named Issa Souf. Have been involved in fundraising for that, have helped. I was invited by the Israeli group to be one of 2 people who would help give them some guidance on addressing much more the Israel-Palestine issues in their teaching. So I've been part of that with the group, and really just trying in different ways to be helpful with the situation. And yeah, maybe that's enough to say right now.
Yeah, and Donald and I had been talking, I think it was yesterday or the other day, and I haven't been to Palestine. I haven't been there. I've had been several opportunities to go, but I've heard just horrifying stories from family members of how they were treated when they've gone, and changed my name to my original name. The shame of not wanting people to know my heritage had me keep my previously married name after divorce. But anyhow, this is my actual name, Fakhuri. And yeah, my uncle, he has family, he has his daughters and family over there and the West Bank, actually. Thank God I don't have any family in Gaza, but I've heard a lot of family members who have. But anyhow, I had a nonviolent communication group that wanted me to go with them to Israel to engage in nonviolent communication workshops with them, and I didn't because I didn't go because I didn't want to incur the abuse that I had heard, say my uncle abuse when he went there. He was 80 years old at the time. He's in his 80s now. He going there to visit family and coming back is a huge pain. Goes through a lot of problems to get in there because of his Palestinian heritage. One time he was on his way back and they put him in a room and said, you can't go. We have to interview you first. He has prostate issues and he has to pee often. And they told him that he couldn't get up. They wouldn't allow him to go. And they made him sit there for nearly 12 hours. And he peed on himself a couple of times. This is an engineer, someone who worked for the Ministry of Roads in Kuwait. This is not, so he had to urinate on himself a few times. And during those 12 hours, well, they continued to harass him. But so hearing stories like that of all the different things that have gone on, and then when I'm invited to go there, I'm like, are you kidding? I don't want to be abused. Why would I go? But I would go with Donald.
Yeah, thank you. And
Yeah.
one of the things I love is that Ronnie and I have been talking together for probably 10 or 12 years. That when I come to teach at Southern Dharma, and I like to spend a day or two in Asheville, and Ronya's been kind enough to invite me to stay. So we've been having conversations for 10 or 12 years. And what I loved, when we, shortly after Sonia invited us to be part of this process, I remember we just had a spontaneous discussion about how collective trauma and intergenerational trauma manifested in our lives. Because I'll just say one more thing about that when I came back from the first trip to Israel and visiting the West Bank, I gave 2 talks through Spirit Rock, which were actually on the Dharma Seed website with about 50 photographs that I took. And I gave a talk. The first talk was more personal, and the second talk was more analytical. And I found that a major framework that I had was that we can understand the situation as being one in which there is intergenerational collective trauma on both sides, with a massive, of course, asymmetry in terms of power, economic, political, military. But nonetheless, so I think probably that was 2017, I gave the talk. I think I might have made the comment, what would really help a lot would be to send 50,000 trauma practitioners to Israel, Palestine. I was joking partly, but there's truth to that. And it's, the definition of trauma is that one can't be in the present moment and is really in a way captured by the pain of the past. And I think that's true. It's for Israelis very much. The great Palestinian nonviolent teacher and activist Sami Awad once said he wishes that after the Holocaust there was collective trauma work by Jewish people.
Yeah, thank you, Donald. And I'm a trauma healing therapist now based on all the work that I've done to heal and to continue to heal trauma. And as Donald said, that trauma shows up when, number one, we either dissociate and we numb out and we just can't be with our emotions, or there are no emotions, or we become totally overwhelmed and lost in our emotions. It's a sign of trauma can be not being open to hearing the other side's perspectives, because there are a lot of different perspectives in this conflict, and um, in a lot of different groups, as well as just getting so stuck in having to watch and hear more and more and more information, right? And my trauma showed up in dissociating and just living in shame. And then when I started practicing meditation, my heart opened up, and a pool of pain and fear and anxiety and all the different manifestations of this intergenerational trauma that was stamped on my DNA when I was born, as well as the conditioned trauma from everything that I've experienced from my parents, as well as relatives, and the ongoing onslaught to the nervous system from hearing more and more stories going on. But this practice kind of forced me to start facing this, and to see it opened up the pool of pain that was there, that and fear and shame and all of that. And so then I had to start working with that and facing it. And then it's, recognizing it in other people too, the trauma and how it manifests. And one of the questions that Donald and I spoke about is, how have we not gone numb? How have we not just, totally disengaged? And for me, first of all, it was, this practice. This practice forced me to face whatever it was that wanted to come up. And of course, a lot of trauma healing therapy has helped a lot too. But going to ask Donald, Donald, how did you not go numb?
Yeah, I mean, well, being mindful of numbness is helpful, just to know when that is the case. And, I can remember from last week, it's hard to keep facing the news and, and but I think what you're pointing to, Ronya, is really the way that, I think really the inspiration behind Sonia really developing the notion for our gathering is really a question of how do we bring our practice to the situation. And so part of it is, what's one of the key elements of our practice? It's being willing to face what's difficult, what's painful, what hurts, to be there. I have found really helpful. I've been part of several ceremonies, which we have called grieving ceremonies. Actually, several of them exclusively for people of Jewish background, where we open to the pain collectively, where we are able to do that. So we can, when I was thinking also of, I brought this book that some of you may know that I found helpful, especially for people of Jewish background, called Wounds into Wisdom, which is subtitled Healing Intergenerational Jewish Trauma. And one of the guidelines is at some point one has to face the pain. And so we have practices for that. We have practices that we have learned how to be with difficult emotions, be with what's painful, have some alertness for when there are tendencies to numbness, whether it's an I don't want to hear the news anymore, while recognizing there is a balance of hearing too much or too little. And being, I think for me, the collective community ceremonies have been so important. That's why I really, again, I'm repeating myself, but I really appreciate and treasure Sonia's initiative with this, because this is a chance, and we explored a lot of it last week, to be together in community and bring our practice forward together, which is really, really crucial. So I would say community, some of the ceremonies and rituals remembering the practice to be able to face, the pain, whatever it might be, the anger, the grief, the despair, the hopelessness. And I think also, I'll say one last thing. I really am helped a lot by reading those and hearing those who I think bring hope and inspiration. There are people, both Palestinian and Israeli, not in the mainstream, and they don't have so much power, who I think have beautiful visions of where this has to go to really move towards healing. I mentioned the Sami Awad, the Awad family from Bethlehem, his uncle Mubarak Awad, who was one of the central teachers of nonviolence in the first Intifada in the late 1980s, who unfortunately was kicked out of the West Bank by the Israelis and is now a professor at American University. So knowing people like that, some of the groups of collaborative work between Palestinians and Israelis, like Combatants for Peace and Families of the Bereaved, there are other organizations, but really staying connected with vision. So that really helps to avoid getting stuck, even when the signs on the ground are not hopeful. Or I don't know if not hopeful is a word, but the signs on the ground don't have too many of those, or hardly any voices with those visions.
Yeah, thank you, Donald. I have to say that connecting with family members has been a double-edged sword for me, because on one hand, it's very supportive to sit and grieve together. On the other, it's been further traumatizing, because like last week I got together with family, and one cousin was just sobbing uncontrollably, and she is lost, so I just kept telling her, trauma healing therapy, I think you need some support, you need help. This is not good for you to listen to the news all the time. Another cousin, his wife, she started sobbing. This is another family gathering. She's lost over 120 family members in Gaza. And she said that her father and siblings were having a gathering when their place was bombed, and they all died, together. Not to mention a bunch of others. So here I am, connecting with family, and another cousin, her husband has lost 108 people in his family in Gaza, including brothers and cousins and so I'm hearing these stories and all the grief and longing and fear and despair. So going to my family has been, like I said, a double-edged sword. But joining some of these groups, practicing, hearing voices of people who are promoting love, connection, healing, peace has been very helpful for me as well. But I'd be honest, I have to be honest that I go in and out of feeling despair. And I think that's pretty normal. You can't live with the question becomes, how can we live with an open heart? Which our practices bring an open heart, right? And whether it's Palestinians, Jews, Ukrainians, Africans, I don't care who they are. When we hear of any people killed unawares, or and children harmed, our hearts naturally open. We grieve. We feel the pain of our fellow human being. So it's our responsibility. So how do we keep our hearts open? Turn towards the pain and suffering. Allow ourselves to let it open our hearts further. And be there for people who are suffering and see that these are waves. They come and they go, they come and they go, they come and they go. And how much is news is skillful to watch? You know, how many conversations are skillful to have in these? That's part of our practice, right? I heard it once said that if you pick up something that's burning, you will naturally drop it. You know, that's our wiring. So when you hold something for long enough and then eventually it starts burning, it can be skillful to set it down for a while and to do some resourcing and taking care of ourselves. And not project. Whatever we don't heal, whatever we don't face, whatever we don't turn towards, we will project onto others, and we will harm others with unresolved pain if we're not being mindful and if we're not learning to work with it skillfully. So it's a lot of, then it's an invitation for us to really do some work. And this work helps us to be able to have conversations with people that have differing views, right? Not everyone's going to share my views. Not everyone has my condition. Not everyone has my intergenerational trauma. They have their own. So can I open my heart and listen with empathy to other people's points of views without getting lost in rage and anger? And that's been my practice, to listen, put myself in their shoes and try to imagine what their perspective is. Listening to, you know, the Combatants for Peace, I've gone to several of their meetings, listening to everybody's stories and their history and their conditioning, I think and their history is different. Yeah, and their version of history. It's amazing to me that we can have such different versions of historical perspectives of what happened. But we do. Can I put myself in their shoes and imagine from where they're coming from, how they're feeling, and what trauma might be arising for them? Donald asked me a good question the other day. How do we relate to demonstrations, right? Whether it's pro or anti. You know, I see there are a lot of demonstrations here, pro-Palestinian demonstrations here. But when it first started, I thought, screw you. Where have you been my whole life? You know, I've been hearing stories since I was born of abuse. And now suddenly you're going to start demonstrating because of, you know, this particular thing that's happening. It's been a series of things where they've been harming one another back and forth. But I'm like, oh, now you care? You know, so that was my original, oh, okay, now we're going to demonstrate. This is just the newest, latest, greatest thing. And then they'll forget it next week. There'll be something else to replace it. But then I realized, oh, this is my own, you know, I drove by a demonstration last week and I looked, there was a woman covered and I looked, it was one of my cousins. I was like, oh my gosh, there's my cousin. Anyhow, so part of me wants to join, the other part of me wants to stay neutral and just deal with my own emotions. How about you, Donald? How have you related to demonstrations?
Yeah, well, let me get to that in a moment by connecting with where you went just a little while ago, which is really for me, which is most central for us, which is to really stay grounded in empathy and compassion and, you know, and goodwill. And I'll come back and say that that's sometimes hard in the context of the demonstrations, but, you know, how do we bring empathy and compassion to all while recognizing the vast differential in power at the present time? And for me, what's been helpful, it's been really helpful to be connected with Israeli fellow Dharma teachers and be talking with them regularly. I have two teachers I talk with generally once a month. And, one of them is, along with her partner, is going virtually every week, or most weeks, into the West Bank, meeting with Palestinian friends, has been helping with the olive crop. And then they stay together and they basically sit and share the pain together, and doing that regularly and hearing stories like that. And then hearing from another friend, just about the fact that in Israel, what is the predominant emotion is fear. We might not get that from the news, but that the mass of the population is caught in fear. And again, that can be connected with intergenerational trauma. And so it's helpful to get that. And one of the things that's been challenging for me is with the demonstrations, or with even with groups like Jewish Voice for Peace, which I've actually been a member, although I have some criticism of some of what they do, but that the tendency is that of polarization, where one has empathy and compassion for one side, but not for both sides. Understandable, and I can try to have empathy and compassion for those who are polarized, right? And I can understand that pretty well. Some of you know I have a background in what's typically been called socially engaged Buddhism. So I've done a lot of trainings in Buddhist practice for activists, right? And we can, looked a lot at the tendency towards polarization, demonization of the opponent, and so forth. And so those are the dangers of the demonstrations when they're not connected to a practice like this. And again, they can sometimes be of help, but they're going to be limited in terms of reaching the goal that I think is the goal of the great nonviolent traditions, which is that Dr. King talked about this as the goal of the beloved community, not the goal of one side winning and the other side losing. Thich Nhat Hanh talked in the same way, even in the context of Vietnam. So those are a few thoughts, Ronya.
Yeah, thank you so much, Donald. I think, for me, it's been really important not to get caught in the politics, and to just stay with my own personal experience, to have compassion for both sides,
Yeah,
sides who've been, dealing with their own trauma. Um, I just think that the human race is continually perpetuating their generational and lifetime trauma onto one another and different groups through the history of mankind. And it's time for us as practitioners to face our own trauma internally, and to stand up and say, no, I'm going to heal this, and I'm not going to pass it on to the next generation.
yeah, beautiful. And maybe just to reiterate some and deepen briefly the point you made, I think, again, how do we come at this from our best sense of Buddhist practice, or maybe even more generally spiritual practice, but the sense that we very clearly have in Buddhist teachings is that of the long-term intention is that of universal metta, universal compassion, and the sense that all human beings have Buddha nature, have the depths of the sacred in their being. And I know there've been discussions, particularly in China, whether that might well be extended to non-human sentient beings. That's another discussion.
Yeah, thank you. So anyhow, we could go on and on with this discussion, but I believe we're supposed to open it up to people now, right, for the large group discussion, Donald?
Yeah, we're at the time, I think you were going to go back and a little bit like me earlier, give some guidelines and suggestions for the large group, and then Sonia would facilitate.
Okay, great. So one thing I just wanted to mention is that I found with my own sangha and the classes that I've led and groups that I've led that it's nice to have, teachers presenting different concepts and practices, etc. But the richness comes in discussions and in dialogue with one another. I've learned probably just as much, if not more, from hearing discussions or dialogue, question and answer. They're very, very powerful because we're relational beings. We learn in relation with one another. We grow, we change, our brain changes from a conversation with the person that we've had. It's pretty amazing. So in the spirit of sharing, we're going to open it up to a group, large group. You can either ask questions or you can share on the screen if you want to, if you're okay with that. But if you want to be anonymous, please send your message to Sonia. You can type it out and send it to her in the chat box. And it can be a sharing or a question. But if you're going to share or have a discussion, you can share with either myself or with Donald. How do you want it to? Please be as brief as you can. We don't want to get a long narrative story just because, we want an opportunity for everyone to be able to share. So it could be directed to either one of us or both of us. It doesn't really matter. And once again, just remembering that we're collectively in this soup together, despite our conditioning or our trauma or whatever, that we remember to stay in our bodies, attend to what's here, and lead with empathy, right? For ourselves, as well as one another. That's so important. And trying to do so with as much mindfulness as possible. Following ethical, non-harming suggestions that Donald and Sonia have mentioned before. So let's open it up.
Yeah, thank you both. So we'll start with Tom, and if you'd like to raise your hand electronically, if you have a comment or a question to share. And again, if you'd prefer to put it in the chat, you can also send it to everyone, and then we can address those questions. Or if you'd prefer to share it anonymously, you can send it directly to me in the chat. I'm the host. So we'll begin with Tom. Tom, feel free to unmute yourself.
Thanks. Thanks, everybody. This has been very heartwarming, not because of the topic, but because of your openness. And I identify in different ways, but the real point of my question is that this is our problem too. I think you sort of intimated that, Ronya, as you were just speaking. Obviously the US, Britain, and Russia wanted to pit these two forces together against each other for political reasons I won't get into, but what it tells me is that I share a lot of the pain as perpetrator as well as sufferer. And I think of that line from the Rolling Stone, who killed the Kennedys? It was you and me. We're part of what's going on there. And when I don't listen to the news. After my last retreat with Donald, I just stopped listening to the news. I don't know that it was good for me or bad for me, but when I do hear it, I try to say to myself, that's something I do. And I don't know if that's good or bad, but whether it's a perpetration of crime or a perpetration of violence. And I don't know how to necessarily heal that. I don't know if it's the same thing. I'm not even exactly sure what I'm talking about, except to say that I don't feel satisfied with it just being about the Palestinians versus the Israelis. I think we're in there neck deep, and I don't know how to extricate myself, or if I even should. So that's it. Thanks. I don't know if there's a question, but I've stopped talking.
I can say something, Ronya, or do you want to start? Okay. Yeah, thanks, Tom. I think there's a lot there, and what you're bringing up actually refers to the history, which we've just gone into relatively briefly. And it's complex and there are different interpretations, but simply from the fact of what is keeping the violence going, I think as US citizens, we have significant responsibility. And so I think that's really an important focus for all of us to really look at that. And it's one of the areas where there can be action, which a lot of people, even in the US Congress, are wanting to act in that way. And I'll just say one other point related to the history, which is that there's a painful aspect in that prior to the 20th century, there were centuries and centuries in which Jewish people and people that we would, sometimes call Arabs, lived very harmoniously together, right? And centuries of that, and going right up to the 20th century. And hopefully that long history can be a resource that we can draw on that. And some of the reasons things are as they are, I mean, there are a lot of complexities, but it is related to some of the actions of the great powers of the 20th century. So you want to add anything on that, Ronya?
One thing I want to add is that it's really hard to take responsibility. First of all, I know two people in here who are from Australia. They're not from the United States that I've seen and are so I don't know how culpable they are, but the news, the news is such a hard thing to the news that my Palestinian family listens to is the facts and figures they're getting are totally different from Gaza than what we're getting here. And the Haaretz Jewish paper that I read just to see what's being said in Israel is different from what we're hearing. So, holding all this with compassion and be like, what really is going on? I don't know that I know for a fact what really is going on. Can I control the US government or any other government for that fact? No. So then what is our practice? Working with helplessness, working with the desire to control and to have control. That's our practice at that point. Yeah, thank you. Kim?
Yeah, we'll just want to share the question that Emily shared before anybody else raised their hand. Donald said, how do we bring empathy and compassion with an immense power differential? And the question was, could you talk a little bit more about that, about how spiritual practice is altered by power differentials?
Oh, that's a big one. When I was I studied how to work with conflicts with the great peacemaker Johan Galtung, originally from Norway. And we worked with models for how one deals with conflicts. And he had done work in international mediations and a lot of powerful work. And I remember in the trainings we had, he said that as a peacemaker, and as someone who would deal with conflicts where there was a power differential, his efforts were especially to have the power differentials be less and less relevant. Easier said than done, but I remember that it's basically that that makes things very hard in this situation. So what it could mean is that in situations, I think, I mean, it could be, we could explore this for a long time, but what comes to mind now is being aware of the power differential, being aware of the history. So some of it might be really to look at straight in the eye, see it. Look at, I don't know if that's the right metaphor, but look at it really clearly. And then in whatever groups or communities one's part of, whatever organizations, especially where there would be groups of Palestinians and Israelis, to have that power differential be as irrelevant as possible in the group, while remaining aware of the larger one. That's the best I can do in a brief way right now, but I think it's a really important question. Maybe we can come back to that.
Ronya, did you want to add anything? Yeah.
Just very briefly, you know, I was born into a power differential, just being female, and then Palestinian. You know, so I was born on the bottom of the ladder, so to speak. And the only thing I can say about power differential is when we stand in our truth and we stay in our bodies and we lead from the mind and the heart with wisdom, that power differential falls away, whether people recognize it or not. At least for us, it does. So then we don't have to stand in the shadows anymore, and not speak from a place of, you know, singing our hearts.
Right, and if I can just add one small piece, Rania, I think that really brings, I think it's part, and it's really fills out the response to Emily, that we can work in our own practices with all the different power differentials in our lives, you know, gender, race, etc., sexual orientation. So, and be aware that how we relate to those is related to how we relate to other power differentials.
Thanks, Donald. Yeah, let's go to Kim.
Hi, thank you so much for this talk. My question is similar to Emily's, particularly when y'all were talking, and the idea of both sides, for me, that brings up an equal power differential, or I guess no power differential, equal power structure. And I really appreciated Emily's question, because when there's aggression and that there's automatically a power differential that can't be erased. And I'm wondering about, from a Buddhist and I guess generally spiritual perspective, in the midst of navigating conflict where there's an aggressor, what your thoughts are on balancing the power in that. I'm just wondering about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a hard one, really, because it depends on our conditioning and our background. How do we typically respond to aggressors, right? Do we typically shrink and go into fear? Do we typically go into aggression and attack? Because those, obviously, we don't want to do either one of those, because neither one are helpful. And dealing with aggression, I'm a 5th degree black belt, probably learned Taekwondo to in response to all of my inner aggression. But that's a good question. And I think standing up to aggressiveness with love, it sounds so trivial, but it's so powerful. Look what Martin Luther King did and other great leaders. Aggression cannot stand to love.
I think I went somewhere similar, which is that for me, Buddhist practice is very, very deeply aligned with the traditions of nonviolent action in many ways. And so a strong commitment to nonviolence, like Ronya was saying, means standing up and addressing aggression, addressing what's harmful, but doing so in a way which is, what can we say, keeping in view that vision of the beloved community. Easier said than done. So there are inner practices as well as outer forms. But I think, again, if we look to Dr. King or what we find with Thich Nhat Hanh, we find something like that. What happened in Vietnam with the engaged Buddhist movement. Not easy. No.
Yeah, Sandy.
I just have a different kind of issue. And what it is that I have a very strong Jewish identity. And I mean, this is so hard for me. So hard. I mean, I listened to a radio program, it's called The Daily, and it was showing what was going on in Gaza, and it was horrendous. I mean, it was horrendous. And then I listened to something about what's happened with the Jews when Hamas, it came to Israel and attacked them, and it's horrendous. And I can't even speak the truth to some people that I'm really close with that are Jewish. I was just thinking, Chabad. I love Chabad. I mean, I love the people in Chabad. But there is no way that they're going to, so I have to not be myself. I can't be myself in Chabad with people I really love. It's really painful. There's no point. There is no point in having a conversation with people I love that have such a different perspective. And so that is really painful. And then I have a friend, these are just two examples, such a close friend, like that when I visit Florida, she's someplace else in New York, I stay at her house for months. I mean, it's a beautiful house. Who's going to let me stay at that house for months? I cannot. I have to pretend. I say nothing. This is the first time in my life that I have not supported Israel. The first time. And when you told me the story, Ronya, about what happened to your parents, the grandparents, and my father told me a whole different story. It wasn't, it was a story that painted the Jews in Israel. Now I understand, but it's just, all I want to say is it's good to have a place where I could tell the truth about something. My Jewish identity is so strong. It has nothing to do with religion. It has to do with the Holocaust. It has to do with anti-Semitism. It has to do with the fact that if there wasn't racism against Blacks in the United States, Jews would be the next one, not Palestinians, Jews. People hate Jews. In North Carolina, I was like shocked. I'm in a gym that I've gone to. It's a cardiac gym, and I've been with people with heart problems for 7 years. And the guy next to me, who I really like, said to me, Jews rule the world. Like totally convinced Jews rule the world. So I don't know what, and this is the last thing I'm going to say. I took this class on the Holocaust, and he said the root of the problem, and it was neurological, is when one human being doesn't see another as another human being. And I remember going to a Jewish friend and saying, look what we're doing to the Palestinians. She didn't think they were people like us. I mean, I'm saying what's going on here? What is with people that we can't see another person as an equal human being? So however, I find this very distressing. I really wanted to come to this group. I needed a place where I can't say the truth any other place. Half my friends don't care about Israel, and the other half are so entrenched in supporting Israel. And I just want to know the truth. But there's no place I could speak it unless the other people are receptive to taking different perspectives. And in most cases, they're not. So whatever you can say to help me, it's eating me up that I can't be myself with people because they're just not open to any other perspective.
Yeah, let's hear from Ronya and Donald about that. Thanks, Sandy.
Thank you, Sandy. Donald, would you like to go first?
I can. Let's see. Thank you, Sandy. I think you've shared something that is probably there, some version of it for quite a few people. Anyone relate? You can hold your hand up. Anyone relate to what Sandy's saying? So that's really important to see, right? That this is shared. And of course, we have these kind of situations occur without involving Israel-Palestine. Anyone have members of your extended family with whom you can't talk about certain things? Okay, right. So it's a general question, and it's sad. What occurs to me, I'll be brief, are two perspectives or two ways of practicing with it. Maybe one is more from the perspective of understanding and wisdom, and we can look to Buddhist teachings. What closes down this, what we're told, is a natural empathy and compassion and kindness. What closes it down? Fear, anger, reactivity in the mind. And so we can know from the teachings that these people have parts of their being are shut for different reasons, often out of fear, almost like going back to the trauma, the survival, a lot of things that Ronya talked about. So that's one perspective, is to know from our Buddhist teachings and practices what, the teaching is the natural way of being is to have openness and kindness and clarity. What kind of conditioning, what kind of life experiences make that impossible? And then secondly, more of a personal practice would be to, again, maybe do something that also would be appropriate just with friends or family where you can't talk about certain things. And here, where it's particularly painful, I think it's to see if you can keep with empathy and compassion for them, number one. And then number two, give room for your own emotions related to this. Give room for that, set aside some time, whatever it is. Anger might be there initially, but ultimately there's a lot of sadness, and really just know that this is, in this context, that's a big part of your practice. Just connecting with sadness over and over again. Ronya.
Yeah, I won't say much more except that you're grieving the loss of a relationship that you once had with a shared history, shared stories, connection where you could talk about anything and it be held in, a certain. So when that's no longer there, there is sadness and there's grieving and the relationships forever change. So I think just feeling into the pain of that and honoring that and finding people that you can share your heart with. Yeah, thank you so much, Sandy. That has to be really hard.
It is.
Thank you, Sandy. Yeah, Lael.
I just want to start with complete appreciation for both of you, Ronya and Donald. I really I'm getting so much out of the things that you're saying. And, I find myself, as always, just personally very triggered by this whole conversation. I almost hate the word triggered because it feels like it's, in that same pool of, all the protests being performative and, all these things that we're talking about are about our current culture. But one thing that occurred to me where you're talking about generational trauma is also one of the aspects of people who have trauma or PTSD specifically is a state of hypervigilance. And I think, as a Jewish person, this hypervigilance has been programmed into my responses. And so I feel threatened in a lot of circumstances. They're various, there's a lot of them, but in particular around this conflict, and in particular about the current response and the protests and all of these things, I find myself in this hypervigilant, fearful, reactionary mode. And I am trying to respond rather than react. And I'm trying to have compassion for everybody, regardless of where they are, whether I feel, that my people's story is somehow being diminished. I'm trying not to react to that in anger, and fear. So that's really all I wanted to add to the conversation is just, I think that what I observe is this polarization it stems from that fear and needing to control and wanting to have some outlet to change the way things are. I mean, I think it comes from a good place, regardless of whether I agree with what somebody is saying. I don't think that people are polarized because they want to beat each other up. I think people are polarized because they're afraid and they want to have control and they want to feel like they can do something productive to stop the craziness. So anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Thank you, Lael. That was so powerful. The first thing I want to say is that my heart breaks for all the, I have many really good Jewish friends, all the anti-Semitism was rampant before any of this happened, right? I've seen it, I've heard it, I've had my friends communicate their pain and their fear. They had to, the synagogue here has to have armed guards now. A good friend of mine is the rabbi. And it's just like, really? This is, and now it's even worse, right? So I can see how your trauma has you be hyper vigilant, but for good reason too, because the trauma continues to be, the onslaught continues, right? If we could have this really difficult traumatic event and situation, and then it it ended, and then we could go to trauma healing therapy, and we can continue to work through the layers until we heal it. That would be great. But no, we continue to be bombarded with hate, with anger, with delusion, ignorance, which makes it even harder. So it's just a constant practice and really loving that part of you that's, that you're trying to take care of right now.
Yeah, maybe just one short thought. I thought, Lael, you expressed it really, really clearly, and the just the way that hypervigilance is so prevalent, right? And in addition to what Ronya was saying, my mind went to just the need to develop more places of community healing and transformation. I think our gathering here is part of that, but what would it be like to go once a month to something in one's own community where one could collectively work with these issues through a framework maybe of collective trauma healing? I think we deeply need those kind of community forums to be develop more. I think I have a long time association with Joanna Macy, and she has elements of it, but there wasn't necessarily a trauma sensitivity. So that's my thought there.
Thank you. We have time for probably just a couple more questions if you could, or comments, if you could kind of try to get to the heart of it quickly. And I'll ask the same of our teachers so that we can try to accommodate multiple people. And next up is Britt.
Sonia, just to check, so we will, because we had 5 minutes at the end, we'll go over the original closing time?
No, we will not.
Because we were going to have 5 minutes of closing with Ronya and me.
Okay, well then since I called on Britt, let's try to allow Britt a moment, and then we'll go back to the closing. Thank you, Donald. Appreciate that.
Thank you both so much. I'll just say briefly, this is pretty connected to the previous response that you gave, Donald, but I was curious if I'm Jewish and have a very strong Jewish identity, and I've felt pretty isolated within Jewish spaces around some of the trauma healing stuff that you've talked about, and thinking about that ancestral trauma. And you mentioned some groups that you've been a part of, and I was wondering if you knew of any like folks doing this within Jewish spaces that, one could join if that's not in your own community.
Yeah, okay. And so now I can be brief with my response. So I'll mention some that come to mind. One is local where I am, but they do a lot on Zoom. The Beit Tikkun community, originally started by Rabbi Michael Lerner, and the current leader is Rabbi Kat Zavis. So look under Beit, B-E-Y-T, Tikkun, which most people know means the kind of the healing and repair of the world, Tikkun. And then I would look to the work of Rabbi Teresa Firestone as well. She's done some collaborative work with other people. I've been to a grief ritual with her, and those are two starting points.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that question. So for others, you are welcome to type into the chat if you'd like us to just pass a message along to the teachers, and perhaps they could even provide any further links or resources on the participant page. So with that, I'll just hand it back over to Ronya and Donald. Thank you for helping us through this session together as a community.
Thank you, Sonia. And thank you for the wisdom and courage to even bring this out to the public. So just now, I want you to just take a moment and to really feel into your body and notice how the body's feeling. Touching into your heart and honoring all the different movements that the heart has made since we've been together here, and in response to this conflict and others as well. Sensing the collective grief, sadness, hurt, whatever is there to be felt. And love, too. Compassion. And if you have an intention for yourself, what you would like to bring to yourself or to the world moving forward, really allowing yourself to touch into that right now. Thank you. And if you'd like to type in some of those intentions into the chat, feel free to do that. And then Donald will close in a moment with our dedication of merit.
Yeah. Should we read a few of those, Ronya? The intention?
Sure.
We don't have any in the chat, Donald.
Okay.
Okay.
Forgiveness, empathy, love, healing, compassion of self and others. Being peace, maintaining openness and attending to pain, open to truth. Thank you all. And now
Thank you.
Donald's going to finish with the dedication of merit.
Yeah, and may these wonderful and heartfelt intentions be our guides, and may they, with the ones read, may they inspire others. So we'll close the traditional dedication of merit. May our time together be of benefit to ourselves. May our time together be of benefit to those in our lives. May our time together in perhaps mysterious ways be of benefit to the larger situation in Israel-Palestine. May our time together go beyond all of those locations. May our time together be a benefit to all beings, which includes us. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to our teachers. Be well.
you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
again,
Thank you.
Sonia, for your brilliance in suggesting this.
Thank you. Thanks to all.
Yeah.
Mhm.
See you soon.
Good night.
Be well.